Okay, I want to talk about looter shooters and the two different types of looter shooters. There's the hero slash class based looter shooter, so this would be games like Borderlands, Destiny, Outriders, and The Division 2 to a certain degree. It doesn't have classes, but instead has specializations. It's close enough, so I'm including it. And the other type are extraction based shooters, where the goal is to try to extract with whatever you loot from the map, and if you die, you lose everything you've brought in and looted. The most well known example is Escape from Tarkov, but there's a few others like Marauders and Vigor. All of these games are looter shooters, and the only thing they have in common is the shooting. How they handle loot is completely different, as well as stuff like first person, third person, if it's cover based, etc., etc. But I'm more concerned with looting. So, in class based looter shooters, weapons and armor typically have perks or stats that are randomized, and crafting a build around the random weapons and armor you get is where a lot of the depth is. There's supposed to be a lot of experimentation when trying to put builds together, but I feel most people probably just look up what the best armor and weapons are, which leads to a lot of people using the same thing. But most of the excitement of looter shooters of this kind comes from the chase. It's hunting down a specific weapon roll or armor piece and getting it that gives people the most excitement in these games. However, the key element there is getting it, and something that I feel a lot of these types of shooters get wrong is how frequently the player should be getting loot. The early game for pretty much all of these games I mentioned, Destiny, Outriders, Borderlands, The Division 2, all start out with the player receiving gear of a higher level at a very rapid pace. So you'll be constantly changing your gear in the early game until you hit a soft cap, which is essentially where the developer wants you to start caring about the weapons and armor. Typically, these games have a way of increasing the difficulty in exchange for more loot at or above your level. The game I'm most familiar with is Destiny 2, and a few ways they've started to implement these difficulty options is with the hard mode campaign, as well as legendary lost sectors, Nightfall strikes with multiple different difficulty options, and heroic public events, which are never rewarding. They could change that by having multiple different difficulties for the planets that give loot corresponding to your level, as well as more of it, but maybe that would be a bad idea for some reason that eludes me. But once you've hit the soft cap, the amount of loot you get that you find meaningful drops dramatically, and it can feel like you've hit a brick wall. This is where the core content loop of the game matters, because if what you're doing isn't any fun, then there's no reason to try and get a good roll on a gun if all you want to do is point it at yourself. The Division 2 is pretty fun until every enemy becomes a bullet sponge that takes forever to kill. And this is where the other aspect of class-based looter shooters come into play, and that's the abilities your class or hero have. It's the combination of weapon perks and class abilities that can make these types of games super fun once you've gotten what it is you want in terms of loot. There are only so many different ways you can shoot things, and there aren't that many perks you can put on weapons to make them interesting. But if you throw abilities into the mix, it gives more variety when it comes to the amount of perks that you can have and their effects, because you can have perks that give your weapon and armor a synergistic effect with your abilities, allowing you to use your abilities more often. Extraction shooters, however, approach loot pretty differently. There isn't usually any randomization of weapon and armor stats, with the exception of the Division 1 and 2's Dark Zone, which is an extraction style content loop. It's not the core way of acquiring gear, but it is there. And so the Division is really like an outlier in that kind of sense. But in Escape from Tarkov, the main way of acquiring gear and items to progress is all in raid. Now, there are ways of safeguarding items by putting them in a secured container to prevent the loss of those items in case you die, but not every extraction style looter shooter has that. The excitement of these games is that they are a PvE VP. So there are AI enemies you have to fight as well as other players. And it's up to you to decide if you want to risk losing everything you've brought in and collected from the map so far to go fight other players or certain enemies, or simply just leave with what you have. The items have value not because of random perks or stats, it's the fact that they can be lost that makes it so heart-pounding when you're trying to extract and you end up coming across other players or the AI. And if you keep losing stuff, you can end up with very little, and it can be hard to make progress, which is part of the downside of these types of games. The Division 1 and 2 has shown that these types of looter shooters can actually be brought together, but there are a lot of problems to work out, like how integral should the extraction style modes be, and what other avenues should the player have to get gear to be able to participate in the extraction mode without running the risk of losing everything and having no way of progressing. The Division is the only game I know of that's tried combining the two, so I would certainly be interested in seeing how another game would try and combine the two. But anyways, I think that's pretty much everything that I wanted to say with regards to the two different kinds of looter shooters.